stood a single clay hut, small, crumbling, forgotten by time itself.
Deep in the silent dunes, where death whispered through endless sand, an exhausted man knocked on the door of a lonely clay hut. The ancient woman who answered should have been his savior, but her cold touch and strange lies made him realize he might never leave alive. By morning, he discovered a truth more shocking than any nightmare. The old woman hiding him wasn't a stranger at all. She was the wife he'd been desperately searching for, trapped in a curse that only his love could break. A knock in the dead of night. The wind screamed across the silent dunes like 1,000 dying voices, carrying sand that could strip flesh from bone. Deep in the heart of this merciless desert, where no road had ever been carved and no traveler had ever returned, stood a single clay hut, small, crumbling, forgotten by time itself. Inside lived Margaret, a woman whose wrinkled face told stories of nearly a century. She survived on rainwater collected in clay pots, dried dates from a single stubborn palm tree, and memories darker than the desert nights. On this particular evening, Margaret sat motionless on her worn mat, her ancient eyes staring at shadows dancing across mud walls. The silence was absolute. It had been years, maybe decades, since another human voice had reached this place. Then, cutting through the howling wind like a knife through silk, came a sound that shouldn't exist. Knock, knock, knock. Margaret's breath caught. Her clouded eyes widened. No one ever came here. No one could survive the journey. The nearest settlement was 3 days away by camel, and the desert between was littered with the bleached bones of those who tried. She rose slowly, every joint protesting, every bone aching with the weight of impossible years. Her bare feet whispered across the packed earth floor as she approached the wooden door. Hello guys. Welcome to my channel where interesting stories of revenge are told. He let an old woman shelter him for one night. By morning, his life was changed forever. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments section below. When Margaret pulled open the door, the desert wind rushed in, carrying sand and the scent of approaching death. Standing in her threshold was a young man, perhaps 30 years old, with Arab features and skin that would have glowed like oil-rubbed bronze if it weren't covered in dust and exhaustion. His dark eyes were hollow with desperation. His clothes hung in tatters. His lips were cracked and bleeding. "Please," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Water, shelter. I'm searching for my wife. I can't go on." Margaret stared at him with eyes that seemed to pierce straight through his skull and into his very soul. For a long moment, she said nothing. The desert wind howled between them. Then, almost imperceptibly, she stepped aside. "You may stay the night," she said, her voice surprisingly steady for someone so ancient. Ethan stumbled inside, collapsing onto the floor as Margaret closed the door behind him. The silence returned, heavier than before. Neither of them knew that this simple act of shelter would unlock a destiny written in curses, bound by supernatural forces, and sealed with a love that had already conquered death itself. The stranger's desperate tale. Margaret handed Ethan a clay cup filled with cool water from her precious reserves. He drank like a man who'd been crawling through hell itself, which in many ways he had. The water ran down his chin, mixing with the dust caked on his neck, creating muddy trails across his bronze skin. When he finally lowered the cup, gasping for breath, his eyes met Margaret's with a gratitude that quickly dissolved into haunted determination. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely. "You saved my life." Margaret said nothing. She simply sat across from him on a faded cushion. Margaret stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then she spoke, her voice soft as shifting sand. "Rest now. We'll speak of tomorrow when tomorrow comes. Something feels terribly wrong." Morning light filtered through the single small window of the clay hut, painting dusty gold streaks across the earthen floor. Ethan's eyes opened slowly, his body still heavy with exhaustion. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then the memories rushed back. The desert, the storm, the impossible old woman who'd saved his life. He turned his head and froze. Margaret stood across the room, completely motionless, her ancient frame silhouetted against the far wall. She wasn't doing anything. Wasn't cooking, wasn't moving, wasn't even blinking. She was simply standing there, staring directly at him with those clouded eyes that somehow saw everything. "Good morning," Ethan said cautiously, sitting up slowly. Margaret didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Then, as if suddenly remembering how to move, she walked toward him with steps that made no sound at all. She carried a folded blanket in her withered hands. "You were cold in the night," she said flatly, extending the blanket toward him. "I'm fine, thank you," Ethan replied. But Margaret had already pressed the fabric into his hands. When her fingers brushed against his skin, a chill shot through his entire body. Her touch was cold. Not just cool, but genuinely unnaturally cold, like touching stone that had been buried in ice for centuries. He pulled his hand back instinctively. Margaret noticed but said nothing. She simply turned and shuffled toward the small cooking area, where she began preparing a meager breakfast of dates and stale bread. Ethan stood, stretching his sore muscles, and moved toward the door. "I should get going. I've already imposed on your kindness too much. If I start walking now, maybe I can cover some ground before the sun gets too high." "No." Margaret's voice cut through the air like a blade. Ethan turned, startled by the sharpness in her tone. Margaret kept her back to him, still fussing with the food. When she spoke again, her voice had returned to that eerily calm cadence. "The caravan hasn't passed yet. They come through every few days, heading toward Amber City. If you wait, you can travel with them. Much safer than going alone." It made sense. Logically, it made perfect sense. But something in Ethan's gut twisted with unease. "When will they arrive?" he asked. "Tomorrow," Margaret said simply. "Perhaps the day after. The desert has its own schedule." Ethan studied her hunched back, the way her shoulders remained too still, the way she'd positioned herself so he couldn't see her face. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. The way she'd been watching him sleep, the coldness of her touch, the convenient excuse to keep him here. But what choice did he have? The desert outside would kill him within hours. And maybe she was right about the caravan. Maybe he was just paranoid from exhaustion and grief. "All right," Ethan said quietly, though his heart raced with uncertainty. "I'll wait one more day." Margaret's shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly, and though Ethan couldn't see her face, he would have sworn he heard something in her breathing that sounded almost like relief. Trapped by invisible chains. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Ethan tried to make himself useful, offering to repair a crack in the wall or fetch water from the well outside. But Margaret refused every offer with that same unsettling calmness. Instead, she insisted he rest, recover his strength, save his energy for the journey ahead. Her concern should have felt maternal, comforting. Instead, it felt like being watched by a predator pretending to be harmless. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of blood orange and deep purple, Ethan sat near the window and watched the endless dunes. No caravan appeared on the horizon. No vast clouds. No signs of life whatsoever. Just wind, sand, and the growing certainty that something was deeply, terribly wrong. Night fell like a heavy curtain. Margaret lit a single oil lamp that cast dancing shadows across the walls, making the small hut feel even smaller, more claustrophobic. She prepared another sparse meal in silence, and they ate without conversation. Ethan tried to make small talk, asking about her life, how long she'd lived here, whether she had family, but her answers were vague, circular, revealing nothing. "You should sleep," Margaret said finally, clearing away the wooden bowls. "You'll need your strength." Ethan nodded and lay down on the thin mat she'd provided, pulling the blanket over himself. But sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. His senses were on high alert, every nerve ending screaming danger. He closed his eyes and slowed his breathing, pretending to drift off while remaining completely conscious. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. The lamp's flame grew lower. Then he heard it, the whisper of fabric against earthen floor. Footsteps so light they barely existed. Ethan kept his breathing steady, his eyes closed, his body perfectly still. Through his eyelashes, he could see a shadow approaching. Margaret's frail silhouette moved toward him with purpose, her steps deliberate despite her ancient bones. She stopped directly beside him. Ethan could feel her presence hovering above, could hear her raspy breathing. His heart hammered so loudly he was certain she could hear it. Every muscle tensed, preparing to defend himself if necessary. Then, slowly, almost tenderly, Margaret reached down and touched his forehead. Her fingers were ice cold, and where they made contact, Ethan felt something surge through him. Not quite electricity, not quite pain, but something ancient and wrong. His eyes snapped open involuntarily. Margaret stood frozen above him, her hands still extended, her clouded eyes wide with something that might have been surprise or might have been hunger. "What are you doing?" Ethan demanded, sitting up abruptly. Margaret stepped back quickly, her movements suddenly fluid despite her age. "You had a fever," she said smoothly, though her voice wavered slightly. "I was checking your temperature." "I don't have a fever." "You were restless, talking in your sleep." "I wasn't asleep." The air between them crackled with tension. Margaret's expression remained neutral, but Ethan saw her hands trembling slightly at her sides. For a long moment, neither spoke. The lamp flickered, casting monstrous shadows that seemed to dance with malicious intent. "Rest," Margaret said finally, turning away. "Tomorrow the caravan will come." But they both knew she was lying. The caravan that never comes. Morning arrived with the same relentless desert heat, but this time Ethan didn't wait for Margaret to wake him. He'd barely slept, spending the night in a half-conscious state of vigilance, jerking awake at every small sound. When the first rays of sunlight pierced through the window, he was already standing, already watching the horizon for any sign of the promised caravan. Nothing, just endless sand stretching toward infinity. Margaret emerged from a small alcove where she slept, moving with that same unsettling quietness. She noticed him standing by the window but said nothing. Instead, she began her morning routine, the same mechanical movements, the same deliberate silence. "Where's the caravan?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Margaret didn't look at him. "Sometimes they're delayed. Desert travel is unpredictable." "You said they come every few days." "Yes." "When did they last pass through?" For the first time, Margaret hesitated. Her withered hands paused over the clay pot she'd been reaching for. "I don't keep track of days anymore. Time moves differently when you're alone." Ethan's jaw tightened. The excuse was too convenient, too practiced. "I need to leave today, with or without the caravan." "That would be foolish," Margaret replied, finally turning to face him. Her eyes held something new now, not just observation but challenge. "You have no water, no supplies, no protection from the sun. You'd be dead before nightfall. Then I'll die searching for my wife instead of rotting in this hut waiting for a caravan that doesn't exist." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something flickered across her ancient face. Hurt, perhaps, or calculation. The day dragged on with unbearable tension. Ethan paced the small space like a caged animal, periodically checking the horizon, seeing nothing. Margaret watched him constantly now, not even pretending to look away. Her gaze followed his every movement, and Ethan realized with growing dread that she'd positioned herself between him and the door. By afternoon, his frustration had transformed into something closer to panic. "I can give you answers. I can show you the truth about what happened to Sarah. But there is a price." Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. "What price?" "Stay one more night," Margaret said simply. "Just one. Tomorrow morning, everything will be revealed. You will understand. You will see what you came here to find." It was insane. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to fight his way out of this nightmare, to run into the desert and take his chances with death. This woman was clearly manipulating him, playing with his desperation like a cat toying with a wounded mouse. Staying another night could mean never leaving at all. But the other part of him, the part that had crossed an impossible desert, that had nearly died searching for the woman he loved, that had refused to give up when everyone else told him to move on, that part couldn't walk away from even the possibility of answers. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Ethan asked hoarsely. Margaret's expression softened, and for just a moment, Ethan saw something in her face that looked almost like compassion. Or maybe it was pity. "You don't," she admitted. "You have to choose. Faith or fear. Love or survival. The same choice we all face eventually." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications and unspoken truths. Dawn broke over the silent dunes with a light so pure it seemed to wash the entire world clean. Ethan had spent the night sitting upright. He was looking for Margaret, but he didn't find her. Sitting calmly on a worn blanket in the courtyard, bathed in golden morning light, was a young woman. She had rich brown hair that caught the sun like polished mahogany, skin that glowed with that same oiled bronze quality his once had, and eyes the color of honey. She wore a simple dress, and she was looking directly at him with an expression of such profound relief and joy that it seemed to illuminate her entire face. Ethan's lips formed a word, but no sound emerged. His legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees in the doorway, his entire world tilting on its axis. "Sarah," he finally whispered, the name emerging as both prayer and disbelief. It was impossible. Completely, utterly impossible. But there she was, his wife, his Sarah, the woman he'd been searching for through 3 cities and across an endless desert, the woman he'd nearly died trying to find. She was here. She was alive. She was real. Sarah stood slowly, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan," she breathed, her voice breaking with emotion. He stumbled forward, half running, half crawling across the sand. They collided in the center of the courtyard, their arms wrapping around each other with desperate strength, holding on as if letting go would cause the other to dissolve into desert air. Ethan buried his face in her hair, inhaling her familiar scent, feeling her warmth, her realness, her impossible presence. "You're alive," he sobbed, his tears mixing with hers. "You're alive. I searched everywhere. I didn't know." "I know," Sarah whispered against his chest. "I know, my love. I know." They held each other as the sun climbed higher, their bodies shaking with the force of their reunion. 6 months of pain, fear, and desperate searching dissolved in that embrace. Nothing else existed. Not the desert, not the mysterious hut, not even the questions that would inevitably come. Finally, after what felt like both seconds and eternities, Ethan pulled back enough to look into Sarah's face. His hands cupped her cheeks, his thumbs wiping away her tears as if to confirm she was truly solid, truly there. So Margaret was gone. The curse finally explained. Ethan's mind struggled to process what was happening. He looked back at Sarah, then at the empty doorway of the hut, then back at Sarah again. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice hoarse with confusion. "Where's Margaret?" "Ethan," she said softly, "there is no Margaret. There never was." "What? That's impossible. I spent 2 nights with her. She gave me water, food, shelter. She kept me here. The words died on his lips as understanding began to dawn, terrible and impossible. Sarah took a deep, shuddering breath, preparing to reveal a truth that defied everything he understood about the world. 6 months ago, she began, her voice trembling, I left our home because I received a message. A stranger had information about my mother, the mother I never knew who died when I was born. The message said she'd lived in the silent dunes, that there were answers here about who she was. Ethan listened in stunned silence as Sarah continued. She explained how she traveled to the desert's edge. I went through the market path on the 3rd day. She'd encountered an old woman hugging her young lover. It was a surprise to me, and I asked myself, how could this be possible? An old woman in love with a young man, what a terrible thing. I don't know what made me to start laughing and making jest of them, not knowing that she was a witch. She immediately turned to me and cursed me. Since that time, I have become an old woman with a wrinkles face, with a walking stick and eyes that seemed to see through time itself. The old woman had grown angry at Sarah's disrespect. With words spoken in a language older than the desert itself, she'd pronounced a terrible curse. Sarah felt her body begin to change immediately, her smooth skin wrinkling, her strong bones growing brittle, her youth draining away like water through sand. But she left one escape, Sarah continued, her eyes meeting his with profound emotion. One condition that could break the curse. She said, when your husband comes searching for you, driven by love alone, and stays with you without knowing who you truly are, showing you kindness without expectation of reward, your true form will return. Understanding exploded in Ethan's mind like the sun breaking over the horizon. Margaret's strange behavior, her insistence that he stay, her cold touch and penetrating stares, the way she'd said his wife was closer than he thought. Margaret was you, Ethan breathed. You were Margaret, the whole time. Sarah nodded, tears streaming freely now. I kept you here because I had to. The curse required you to stay with me, to show me compassion, to treat the old woman with kindness even when fear told you to run. What about the caravan? Ethan asked suddenly. Was that ever real? Sarah smiled, pointing toward the horizon. Look! Ethan turned and saw what he'd been watching for. A line of camels and travelers moving across a distant dune, their silhouettes dark against the golden sand. The caravan was real. It had always been real, and it was heading their way. They gathered the few belongings Sarah had, mostly just the blanket and a small water skin, and began walking toward their rescue. With each step, Ethan glanced back at the hut. It grew fainter, more transparent, until finally it vanished completely, leaving nothing but undisturbed sand rippling in the wind. Thank you, Sarah said quietly as they walked, her hand tight in his. For not giving up on me. Ethan brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Thank you for waiting, for believing I'd come. The desert sun climbed higher, warming their shoulders, illuminating the path ahead. They'd been tested by forces beyond understanding, separated by supernatural malice, trapped in forms that denied their very identities. But love, patient, faithful, unconditional love, had proven stronger than any curse. Moral lesson. This story reminds us that true love isn't about perfection or appearances. It's about seeing the soul beneath the surface and choosing kindness even when fear whispers otherwise. Ethan didn't know he was showing compassion to his own wife. He simply treated a lonely old woman with the dignity every human deserves. That's the real magic. When we act with genuine compassion without expecting anything in return, we break invisible chains not just for others, but for ourselves. Love that survives trials, that searches through impossible deserts, that stays when logic says to flee. That's the love that transforms curses into blessings. In a world that often values beauty, youth, and convenience, remember that the greatest power lies in staying, in caring, in choosing faith over fear. Sometimes the person you're meant to save is closer than you think, hidden behind circumstances you don't yet understand, waiting for your kindness to set them free. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like,
You
subscribe,
look so happy.
share it with your
I am.
friends,
This is
and
perfect.
tell us what you
I
learned
never
in the
want this to
comments
end.
below.